She is Dr. Asha Subramanian. She holds a MStat Master in Statistics from Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta, and a PhD in Data Science from IIIT Bangalore. Her research interests include knowledge representation and reasoning models, semantic web, machine learning, and graph networks, particularly focusing on developing unique models that can bring all these technology domains together to better understand data and its context. Currently, as founder and CEO of Semantic Web India Private Limited, on a mission to develop and harness self-learning knowledge graphs from raw data that can generate useful insights on a variety of domains, especially for the Indian context. Dr. Asha has a rich information technology industry background with over 2 decades of program management and delivery experience also. Welcome to you, ma'am, and we are very hopeful and we are very delightful to listen to you. We are waiting for you for the session, ma'am.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
Thanks a ton. So thank you for inviting me once again, Dr. Sarika. Just a small correction. I think in the end of the previous talk, you mentioned that our company is from Pune. No, we are from Bangalore.
I'm sorry.
We are located in Bangalore. Okay. And
yes.
So today's session, as Dr. Sarika requested, was to cover a lot of hands-on. It's a bit hard for me to explain a hands-on session in 2 hours over an online conference, but I have tried my best. We will have quite a bit of an interactive session today. You will get a lot of opportunity to interact with me either through quizzes or polls, and also a lot of code components I have included within the presentation. So you're able to see how does one really build an application. I'm sorry, it's the wrong window that I have opened. Sorry for that. So let's begin.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So some part of my talk will be a repeat of my previous talk, just to set the context very, very quickly before we delve into the details. So what exactly is semantic web? Very quickly, you must have heard about it umpteen number of times by now. It's a web of knowledge which makes your data along with its context machine readable. In very simple terms, we convert the knowledge that we know about the world into tuples, basically looking like subject, predicate, and object. So I've actually picked up a couple of tuples from the DBpedia vocabulary. DBpedia, as you know, is the knowledge base that has been converted using Wikipedia data. Now, every tuples typically in a semantic web representation takes the form of a subject node, a predicate node, and an object node. And the difference is that each of these subject, predicate, and object is a unique URL from a vocabulary. What is a vocabulary? A vocabulary actually defines how you're going to define your facts in a specific domain of interest. So you could have vocabularies related to, say, the education domain, the health domain, maybe a general governance domain, and so on and so forth. In fact, in the course of this particular presentation, I will expose you to a lot of different vocabularies. Now, semantic web is all about interoperability and a consistent way of knowledge formalism, and these are defined by what is called publishing standards. So all semantic web vocabularies are supposed to adhere to the 5-star principles of semantic web. which actually detail how am I supposed to define nodes, how am I supposed to define properties, and so on and so forth. And these formalisms form the basic building blocks of semantic web. Resource description framework, RDF, is a kind of a knowledge formalism that is widely used in the semantic web representation. Why do we build semantic web applications? Basically, if we didn't associate the context of the data along with the data, then for the computer, each of these terms, India, New Delhi, or whatever, would just be a string of, say, 5 characters or 7 characters and so on. When you associate a context to a specific data, then the machine now understands it exactly the same way as a human brain does. So that's the difference. And when you do that, suddenly all your applications tend to become very intelligent. So it serves the purpose of information retrieval and data integration. Why is it so important? Say, for example, we were building a very small application, a small application related to, say, an organization which is into lab experiments. Then typically the organization would be collecting samples. There would be observations related to that particular sample which come from a specific data set. There are measures, and they're reported by someone. So using a semantic web vocabulary, you can actually integrate this diverse information into an integrated knowledge graph. So how do you do that? You basically use these various ontologies. These are all examples from the biomedical domain, where biomedical ontologies, or the unified medical language system, and so on. So now what happens is, all your data sets which was scattered across multiple lab experiments in the organization, they all come together and form this also somewhere. Yeah. So they form something like a connected network of knowledge. Now, your own data, which was originally only relevant to that particular department, now starts to miraculously talk with other data sets across the organization. And how does this happen? This happens because each of your data has been converted into something meaningful using these vocabularies. Well, that's why semantic web finds a huge amount of importance. The second area why semantic web is important is because you tend to decouple the data from the metadata. What do I mean by that? There are certain group of individuals who know the disease domain very well, or who know the medical language very well. So it's best for those group of individuals to maintain the vocabularies, whereas I, or the person who's using those vocabularies and creating applications, they focus on their core business, right? So that's how, when you decouple the data from the metadata, it becomes extremely useful, and that's once again the building block of semantic web. So what is the role of semantic web in the data science canvas? So as you are all aware, you're all, many of you are students or faculty members dealing with a lot of AI and ML. So raw data, with the help of either artificial intelligence algorithms or machine learning algorithms, or even if it was a very, very simple, data processing or analytics algorithm, it converts your data by understanding the patterns, and then it tries to predict some outcomes, right? So that's what we are doing. That is the objective of actually having these interventions of AI or ML algorithm. And when you predict those outcomes, they become useful in a variety of domains, right? Now, typically, these patterns have to be understood by domain experts, right? So those domain experts have to understand, because the machine can't understand those outcomes. It can only say that if you're building a recommendation system, it can only say that people of a certain profile, if they are buying bottles of milk, they tend to buy bread together, right? So that's what they do. Or people, if they watch a certain movie of a specific genre, then many people of the same profile end up watching the same kind of movies. But the computer really does not understand what a movie means or what a recommendation rating means, right? It is only doing it by means of how these data pieces are coming together. It is the domain experts who look at the patterns and then they refine the algorithm. They either refine the algorithm or they augment the machine learning process with more inputs. Now here is exactly where semantic web fits in. The semantic web fits into a region which is a good overlap between the algorithm and the domain expert itself by way of semi-automating the inputs that are going into this algorithm. So rather than fully depending upon the domain expert, it can now suggest, it can automatically suggest by looking at the context that, oh, okay, if the person is actually seeing these movies together, I know for sure that typically comedy movies go well with these specific actors, who these are the kind of actors that this particular person might be interested in, right? So those intrinsic relationships that the machine cannot predict, but only the domain expert can say that, can now be semi-automated by semantic web. And now this starts to become a very lethal combination when combined with your existing AI/ML. So that's precisely the role of semantic web. Now, just a quick warm-up for each one of you. You've been attending a whole lot of sessions starting early on this week. So if you can all go, just type in slido.com on your mobile phones, or if you're working on your desktop, please go ahead and type in this particular ID. And can you answer this question? Right, good. So I guess you've been sufficiently inducted into the concept of semantic web. Just a small caution here. Yes, Protege is used to populate the ontology, but only in cases where um, it's a small application. But when you're looking at industry scale application, which is what is my topic today, Protege alone cannot be used for populating the ontology. But yes, defining the ontology, checking the consistency of an ontology is something that Protege is used for.
Asha ma'am, may I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
As you said that Protege alone cannot be used for populating the ontology. Is it something like that? If we want to use Protege alone, then it is 100% manual effort. We could code in the instances.
Yeah, it's 100% manual effort. And so that's why it would be something for academic interest, or something where you're populating some basic values of the A box. Maybe for that particular reason, you can use Protege. But when you go in for an industry scale application, you have to create those instances using either a user interface or some bulk routines or some pipelines, which will actually keep populating the ontology.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go further. What are the components of a semantic web application? And today, here is the crux of my talk is actually going to be here. So first step is to build an ontology. And how do you build it? You use Protege largely to build it. Now, when you build an ontology using Protege, you don't start from scratch, right? That's the entire objective of using semantic web. We don't start from scratch because there are already a whole lot of ontologies that you can borrow right, that you can reuse. And these are available in the linked open data space or the linked open vocabularies, right? W3.org has some ontologies. We'll in fact be looking at some of them. And then there are a lot of domain specific ontologies. For example, if you're building a retail platform, that is an online e-commerce portal where you're going to trade or buy and sell products, then there is an ontology called good relations. That's all about building products in the e-commerce domain. Or if you're going to be building an application which is in the medical or the healthcare, there are tons and tons of vocabularies that you can use from UMLS, which I just showed you in one of the last slide. So that is basically a unified medical language system where things like patient, symptoms, and so on, right? So these standard definitions have been predefined. If you're building an application that is involving people, place, things, you can use schema.org. So these are, that's what I meant by saying that you pick up what you can already reuse. The second important step is to populate the ontology. As you can see, I have not set Protégé here because Protégé actually forms a very small percentage, maybe 1 to 2% of the effort of populating, especially when you're just populating some of the basic ABox instances. That's when you would use. Ideally, you would actually be using an algorithm to either generate the data semantics. I just, in the last few slides of Vishal, I heard him talk about OpenRefine. So OpenRefine actually picks up, random Excel files or CSV files and tries to generate instances by linking them to well-known vocabulary. So you have to generate the data semantics through some algorithms, or you can use a user interface. Right, so a person actually fills up a user interface. Today, I'm going to show you one such example of where you can enter through a UI, or one can do bulk load, right? So you understand that the way you access a vocabulary is through Sparkle. You can either use bulk loads or automated pipeline. I'm going to be taking you through how we built a very comprehensive vocabulary for India's metadata, and we use a lot of automated pipelines to do that. The next step is to validate, maintain, and enrich the ontology. Now, just populating the ontology is not sufficient. As you can see, you are using some routines to do that, and there are bound to be some errors. So one has to validate the ontology. And of course, one has to maintain it as well, right? I have to maintain, I have to enrich. And these are done, this is a separate step. I would actually put it as a separate step where I select from the vocabulary to see, what kind of data has been populated. I do verification. I have to manage provenance. This is very, very important, especially when you're building an industry scale application. You have to manage the provenance. What do I mean by that? Say, for example, you're building a system. Let's take the example of the FDP program. Say tomorrow we want to build a linked data application that is going to maintain the FTP application, the complete end-to-end functionality of running a complex program like the FTP. So first, what would you do? You would identify what are all my sources, which are going to, what are all my data sources. There could be some text files from where you can populate your data, or that you could be creating a user interface to populate your database. But most importantly, I need to maintain how is my data changing over time. For example, today version 1 of a particular text file was used to upload into an ontology. So say in due course of time that source has changed into a second version. So I need to keep track of what was there in the first version, how did it change in the second version, what specifically happened, did some tuples get deleted, did some tuples get added, did some of them get modified, what is the difference between version 1 and version 2, who was the source for version 1, who's the source for version 2. These things are very important. We are dealing with data, right? And when you build an application, it has to be credible, it has to be reliable. So the people who are consuming it would like to know if the base data, or if the data behind the semantic web application is changing, how is it changing? What were the sources that made them change? And that is managed by an ontology called the provenance ontology. And of course, links to other vocabularies. You build your base application and then you link it to other vocabularies depending upon your business problem. So that's how you validate, maintain, and enrich the ontology. And finally, of course, we are doing all this so that I can apply specifically the semantic intelligence. So when I have to do that, I use reasoning rule. I use reasoning, through an Apache Jina component, or I use rules. Ultimately, I build a lot of ML algorithms infused with the semantic web data to make some intelligent insights. So this is the complete cycle, and we will actually go through each one of them now in detail. Of course, just doing this is not enough. You need to have an interface to your knowledge graph or to your vocabulary, right? And that interface is through a visualization component. And you typically build it, either you can use Angular, or if you're using an application that has to be ported across multiple devices, say mobile phones, iPads, and so on and so forth, then you use Ionic. Then there is an application layer, where the request that is coming from the visualization layer has to be sent to the graph layer, and then there is a lot of processing that is happening. We call that the application layer, and typically you can have a Python based application layer or a Java based application layer. There are multiple models for that. Then of course the persistent storage, where is your data actually going and residing? So it will either reside in a Virtuoso RDF store, or you want to store it in a GraphDB, and so on, right? In today's talk, I am not going to take you through building an Angular component or building this layer, right? Because that's a separate tutorial altogether. So I'm going to focus on the semantic web component, but give you links as to how you can, probably, build an Angular component or the application layer. So today's, when I take you through the code walkthrough, it will be largely for exactly where the semantic web component fits in, right? Okay, so the first step, how do I build an ontology? Before I build an ontology, very important, what is your requirement? What do you want to achieve? You are building a knowledge management application, but what is your business need? You need to identify that, because if the business need is to build a transaction-based system, then there is no need to invest so much of effort into building a semantic web application. So you need to really come up with a good use case or a requirement. Once you do that, the second step is to identify the data sources. How am I going to build my data for this application? Is it going to be built by creating a user interface, a UI screen, or a front end, as they call it, where people are going to type in and the data goes into the backend? Or is there a particular source which periodically keeps updating a text file, or any other structured form like a JSON or an XML? Maybe there are in the public domain, there are websites which you have to scrape, pull out the data, and then use them to populate your semantic graph. So first you have to identify those sources. Once you have identified the sources, you have to gather your data sets, because data sets come in all kind of flavors, right? Some of them, as I mentioned, could be an XML. Some of them could be in the form of a CSV file, and so on and so forth. And finally, I have to create a semantic model. So let's see what happens. So I have database tables, I could have CSV files, I can have Excel, text, XML, or you can actually be importing an RDF, right? You could, for example, import an RDF, like a disease vocabulary, right? Things like that. Now here, I am actually, as you can rightly understand, I am building a clinical trial application. So clinical trial is a kind of a class where there is a start date, there is an end date. Each clinical trial is testing on a specific drug, right? And so there is a drug class. There is a person who participates in a clinical trial, and then the person gives a review on the drug, correct? So this is my model. This is the semantic model that I've built. So when I'm building such a model, I will ensure that I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. For example, the person class, I will most likely not create afresh. I can actually use a schema.org person or any of the others, right? Or if there is a clinical ontology already out there, which is time tested and useful, I might use that, right? So this is how you take a decision of building um, a semantic model. And what does a semantic model consist of? Class and properties, of course, right? So there are data properties. These mauve colored ones are data properties. And then there are object properties where it refers to another class, right? And there could be some external vocabulary also that is attaching itself to your semantic model. Now let's look at the use case, right? Now, this is a specific use case where how did we build the Bharti vocabulary, right? By using very, very simple terms, how did we build this? Now, this is the website. So for a minute, I'm going to go to this particular website because I want to show you the data sources that we used, so you can understand, you know, how we built it. Now, for example, say we pick up we used a lot of information from the local government directory. I hope you're all able to see my screen, because as I move from one screen to the other, I'm hoping that
Yeah,
okay.
it is
Now,
there.
yeah, fine. So if you go to the LGD directory, now let's see, right? So when you go here, you can see there are a whole lot of data sets, right? I can actually go and download. I can download a data set. So this is how we actually went and downloaded data sets from here, and how do I go back to? Okay, yeah, let me go back to the Bharti. So this was one site. The other option was the LGD directory itself. Okay. So if you look at the local government directory, now the local government directory gives you a lot of entities regarding, if you go through this particular website, you can actually download information about states, about districts, and so on. So once again, you know, these data sets come in various flavors. They can come in Excel sheets, CSV files. So this was one way that we downloaded. Or even XML. Look at this one. This particular place actually goes and comes, it basically picks up data sets. Sorry. So here, you know, as you can see, this is a website, right? So I can actually go to, from this particular website, scrape the data and build the ontology. So all forms were used while building Bharti. Now, typically, so if you look at uh, what went behind the scenes of building this, so we used an ontology called the organization ontology, right? And I will take you through the organization ontology also in a brief moment. Now, using the organization ontology, we built a class which is called the bhorg organization class. As you can see, this is a subclass of the organization ontology. And we said that every single entity in Bharti, whether it is a state or a district or a village, they're all at the core, they are type their type is an organization type. We also said that every organization has got a spatial location, and that spatial location, we used the geonames ontology to link it. Now, the geonames ontology is actually an ontology which links all the places in the world with a specific lat long and so on and so forth. So we reused that particular ontology. Now, every organization, every entity in Bharti could either, as I mentioned, it could either be let me show you right from here. So an entity within Bharti could either be an administrative region, or it could be an organization, or it could be a organization classification or the sector. So what is the difference? If you look at what is an administrative region, an administrative region actually is the are the entities that define how a state or a district or a block look like. Whereas if you go in for a organization, then you are actually looking at things like international organizations such as the embassies, or judiciary organizations such as the high courts and district courts, or you can actually have a union government entities such as apex bodies and independent departments, ministries, and so on, right? So at its core, each organization belongs to a specific classification, and that classification, we used what is called the SCOS vocabulary. So the way all of them came together is that a specific administrative region called West Bengal can have multiple departments, such as the state departments or urban local bodies belonging to that particular department. And each of these entities is further classified through a classification. So as you can see, each of these classifications are defined in the SCOS concept. So this is how we built it. And before I go into this one, let me just explain a little bit about how you can figure out, the ontology for yourself. So now I would request you, if you have your machines open, I would request you to go to Bharti. Right, you can see that the URL is this one. I would request you to go to that site, go to the download section, and download what is called the Bharti ontology.owl file. Can you see this? Can you see the your bottom left corner? So when you click on this download, it actually downloads what is called the Bharti ontology.owl. I would request you to do that. And once you do that, I will take you through Protege. So I have a local installation of Protege. Probably Protege is already open. Yeah.
Madam?
Yeah.
Hello. Madam?
Yes.
Actually, I am on the Semantic Web website.
Yeah.
Semantic Web India website. And then
Yeah.
where I have to go actually? Can you please guide me?
Yes. So what you need to do is, in the Semantic website, can you go to the download? Can you see a download? Semantic Web. So what you have to type is semanticwebindia.in/Bharti. If you have typed that, go to the download page. Have you reached the download page?
Yeah, madam. Wait, give me a few seconds. I'm just.
Yes.
Semanticwebindia.in.
Yeah. /Bharti. Semanticwebindia.in/Bharti. So once you download that, you can actually open that in Prodigy, exactly like the way I'm doing. I'll come back to this once. Once you all have been able to do that, I'm hoping that you've downloaded the Bharti ontology.
Madam, sorry to interrupt. Which should I
Yeah.
download? Oh, actually, I'm on the website actually.
Yeah.
What
So
should I?
can you see Bharti schema? Just
Yes,
download.
Bharti schema.
Yeah, that's it. You download Bharti schema. It will download what is called Bharti ontology.owl.
Yes, madam.
Correct. That's it. So once you do that, now you can go to your Prodigy screen and open that ontology. And once you open Prodigy, whatever you have downloaded, Bharti ontology.owl, when you open, the first thing that you will notice it is importing all the ontologies that we have used to build it. You can see that it is imported 3 ontologies on its own. So one is the organization ontology, the SCOS ontology, and finally the geonames. So there are 3 that it would have imported. So I'm hoping that you've been able to do that.
It is opened.
Yeah.
I got actually in the right hand side. I got some axioms. 7,690 different axioms are there.
Yeah. So once you open, you can go to the entities. You can go to entities. There is only one entity that we have built. All the others have been reused. There is only one entity that we have built, and that one entity is right under if you see an entity called FOF agent, within that there is an organization entity that
Ma'am,
is coming from, yeah.
Ma'am, it will be better if you please share your screen of.
Oh, is it? Have I not shared?
Actually, we can see the download page of Bharti,
Oh, is it? Just okay, just one second. Let
not the
me.
protege.
Oh, okay, sorry. So let me. So this is what happens in many cases. Sometimes you know, sometimes what happens is it doesn't show you the pages that I'm working on. That's the reason I keep asking you whether you're also on the same page as I am.
Yeah. One thing can be, if you share your whole screen, then whenever you swipe, it could be there.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll let you know also. Whenever we feel something like that, we'll let you know.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to share again. I've just sorry, just give me a few minutes. So I'm only getting one option to share. I do not know whether that is the one to share the whole screen. Let me see.
Ma'am, when you click on share, what do you see? Do you get all the windows that are open on your PC?
Yeah. What should I do to?
Okay. Otherwise, we'll let you know. You could click on protege screen.
Yeah, fine. I'll do that. See, it is saying share web browser, share oh, okay. If I say share content, is it?
Maybe I don't know. I can't say that way.
Okay,
Otherwise, we'll let
okay.
you know. Otherwise, also. This is
So
web browser.
this is the web browser. Maybe this won't suffice because if I
No.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you'll have to do protege. Do protege.
Okay, share my meeting window. Maybe no,
No.
share content.
What is share content?
Um,
Share content. Inside share content, there are many screens.
yeah, correct. So I will share Protege maybe. Just one second. Let's see whether this works. I'm clicking on Protege again.
Yeah, it works.
It works? Okay, fine. So this is what.
Protege will open now. And on my laptop, I can see it when I'm opening the Bharti ontology. It is saying the system couldn't locate the ontology geonames.org.
So ideally, you should not get that problem because GeoNames is actually a public ontology. It's okay. For now, you say okay and move ahead. Ideally, it should not do that.
Okay, so I do not resolve the missing import. So let it not import it and open the ontology.
Correct. Can you see my screen now? Can you see?
Yeah, Protege is
Yes,
there.
ma'am.
Protege is there.
Okay, good, fine. So if you look at it, in this, you have the FOF agent, and within that is the formal organization. And within the FOF agent, there is an organization which is actually coming from the organization ontology. And this one is what, if you hover on that, you will see that the namespace is actually Bharti's namespace. So that is the only one class that we have added for Bharti. Everything else is reused. Okay, and if you go to the object properties, you will find all the object properties listed here that are coming from the multiple ontologies. And once again, the ones that you see in bold are the only ones that we built to extend our ontology. Similarly, if you go to the data properties, here in data properties, most of them is coming from the external ontologies. The only ones we added are the ones which are there in the bold section, where the URL for the organization source, what was the source from where this organization was populated into the ontology, and so on. So the idea, that the reason that I wanted you to open this and check for yourself is that a specific vocabulary is considered very good if you reuse as much as possible from known ontologies in the public domain. Of course, if you're trying to create something very, very unique, you will have to build from scratch. But typically, every application will refer to a place, will refer to person, probably will refer to an organization entity. And in all such cases, the endeavor should be that you try to reuse as much as possible. Now, this one was a case where you saw that the reuse was to such minimum. So let's look at. How do I move this tab to actually see? I need to see the behind. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Right. Now let's look at another ontology that we built. Oops. This thing almost fully is closing the whole thing. Okay, now this one was something that we built, as you can see, for the Principal Accountant General of Karnataka. Now, the Principal Accountant General's office in any state, what do they do? They actually audit the government, right? They audit the government. So what do they audit? They will most likely say pick up the education, say for example, Ministry of Education. And then they will say that we would like to audit how you have used the funds that have been allocated to this particular ministry. And typically, these kind of audit functions that the Accountant General's office do in any particular state, they have a process of selecting the organization for audit. And for selecting the organization for audit, there are certain rules that they follow. For example, has there been any, complaints regarding that particular organization in the public domain, or have there been too many open audit observations from the last time they did the audit, and so on. In this particular case, because they had to share a lot of data amongst all of their auditing department, because the entire office will audit multiple departments. They will sometimes audit health, labor, education, your urban, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of requirement to gather all this information and share amongst the various departments. We decided to go in for a semantic web application. Now you can see how many of these classes we had to create on our own, because we don't find a particular ontology out there in the public domain that is aligned with an audit function. So this is a second example that I'm showing you, where, depending upon the requirement, you might really have to customize a lot. But still, in this particular case, we reused quite a lot of ontologies, and this list that you see here are the ones we actually reused. So we have once again reused geonames. We use the SCOS vocabulary. Now, many of you might not have worked with the SCOS vocabulary in detail. In today's workshop, I'm going to actually take you through a complete tutorial on how to use the SCOS vocabulary as well. Now, as you can see, this is an example where I'm not going to go through the detail because this function itself was very complicated. But what I really wanted to show you is that using the basic ontologies of organizations, SCOS, and geonames, we built DIA, which full form is Data Integration Analytics Ontology, specifically for the Principal Accountant General. Each of these arrows that you see are interrelationships between the various classes. Right. So this is the second one. Now, part of the hands-on we actually did, I wanted you to I wanted you to work with the Bharatiya ontology, and see. The second hands-on, we are going to do it together, that is understanding the SCOS ontology. Additional exercises, when you find time, I would strongly urge you to go through schema. FOF stands for Friends of a Friend ontology. The DBpedia ontology itself, it's a very good way to begin your journey with semantic web. So these are things that I might want you to do, further beyond this workshop. Now let's spend some time with the SCOS ontology. It's very, very important that you understand this because almost every semantic web application ends up using the SCOS ontology in some manner or the other. SCOS stands for Simple Knowledge Organization System. When do you use it? When you have to implement a taxonomy within your application. Once again, let's go back to that example that I mentioned. Suppose we want to build a linked data application for the FDP program. What could be the entities that form a taxonomy? Here, it could be things like the kind of courses that the FDP does, as part of any program. Could be semantic web is one, your personal development could be another one, and so on and so forth. So each one of them is a set of terms which are relating to a specific category of programs, and they could actually be organized in a taxonomy, number one. The second thing would be the kind of participants that are joining the FDP. They could be faculty members, students, bureaucrats, and so on and so forth. So once again, there's a taxonomy of terms that you might have to build. So whenever there is a requirement to organize terms or to build a taxonomy, you use what is called SCOS ontology. And in SCOS, the way there are multiple classes, but I'm going to be concentrating on a few which actually form the core of the SCOS ontology. You have something called SCOS concept. Every term within the ontology is a SCOS concept. So each one of them is a concept. So here, each of these boxes is a SCOS concept. Right? Each of these boxes is a SCOS concept. Now, here I'm actually representing how we used SCOS for Bharti. So there we had to create a hierarchy of terms for state. Within the state and UT, you have states, union territories, national capital territory. Within each one of them, you have many districts. Each districts are divided into blocks or sub-districts. The blocks and sub-districts are in turn divided into villages. There is also a term called smart city. There are roughly 100 smart cities in India, correct? So we can actually convert all of them using the SCOS vocabulary. So in a SCOS vocabulary, the first thing that you define is what is your scheme. Every set of terms that you are defining can be organized into various schemes. So all these terms I have organized into a scheme called administrative region. So this green color one, the SCOS concept scheme, actually aligns with what is called the scheme. For this, in this particular case, the scheme is administrative region. Then you define your SCOS concepts. Each of them is a SCOS concept. So within your application, state and UT is a SCOS concept. State is a SCOS concept. All of them belong to this particular scheme. So there is a property that relates the SCOS concepts with the SCOS scheme, and that property is called SCOS in scheme. I didn't include that. So SCOS in scheme is a particular property. Now, how do I define the hierarchy? So as you can see, NCT has got NCT and district are connected through this property called border of. So how do I read it? I say NCT is border of district and district has a border of NCT. So that's how the border and border of concepts broader of properties relate two concepts. So it basically gives you the sub-concept and the parent concept relationship. Broader tells you what is my parent concept, broader of tells you what is my child concept. Each concept can have multiple properties like the preferred label, the alternate label, and the notation. What is the difference? You can have only one preferred label for every concept, but you can have multiple alternate labels. The way we have used it in Bharati is, say for example, there is a concept and its preferred label is called Prayagraj. The alternate name, that is the way it was known earlier, is Allahabad, for example, right? So that's one way. Notation is a kind of a symbolic notation that uniquely identifies that concept. For example, as you all know, NCT is a very good abbreviation which actually expands to National Capital Territory, or UT is an abbreviation for Union Territory. So we can say that there is a SCOS concept whose label is Union Territory and whose notation is UT, say for example. So that's the way you use the SCOS concept. And now let me explain this whole thing, in the context of Bharati once again. So I'm going to take you to Bharati. Let's. I don't know how to, this particular thing. Okay, home. Let's go to the home page. Okay, so say for example, I type Kurukshetra, right? I type an entry called Kurukshetra. Now, as you can see, Kurukshetra is an entity whose classification is district. And it belongs to the state of Haryana. So if I typed in Kurukshetra, you will find that the context is defined at every step. Kurukshetra is a district within the state of Haryana, correct? So if you particularly looked at the hierarchy of this one, as you can see, district has got a parent classification of this and a sub classification of sub-district. So this is exactly the way that we have built. If you went to the view semantics page, you will see how this was built. So can you see that I am talking about, can you all see my screen first of all? I hope you can.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
good. So this district, the preferred label is district. The alternate label is also district in this particular case. I have used the broader property to link it to, these are the, so which means that district's broader or the parent is National Capital Territory, State, Union Territory, and so on. This is in the scheme of organization type. And it has a few subclasses, sub-taxonomy objects, which is sub-districts and blocks have parent called district. And we are also saying that this district is a classification of so many entities. It's a classification of entities such as Adilabad, Agra, Ahmedabad, and so on and so forth, right? So this is how you actually build a taxonomy of objects. I think I have to move on. I'm grossly behind schedule in the way we are progressing. Okay, let's go back here. I hope you've been able to understand. The SCOS. Now, time again for at this juncture, if you had any questions, or maybe actually I had set aside some time for questions, but pardon me, I need to cover a lot of ground, so I'll go further down. I have left another small amount of time for an audience interaction. We will come back to the audience interaction at the end of the session. The second step is to populate the ontology. Now, to populate the ontology, as I said, I can either have a user interface. How does the user interface look like? It's very simple. It's like a front end application, right? I type in something, and actually there are routines that take my typed values and go ahead and populate the ontology. That's one way. Or I can actually design bulk routines. What do I mean by bulk routines? You have an Excel file, or you have a CSV file. You have to create what is called Python code or some kind of, or Java code or whatever, that reads the data from the CSV and maps it to your T-box and generates the instances. That is called an automated routine to read from a CSV file and update into the ontology. In this particular case, the same clinical trial. So there is a clinical trial identified by the name 108. It is on a drug called erlotinib. And then there is a person who participates in the clinical trial, and then there is a review that the person is giving. Now, this could have been populated either using a front end, or it could have been populated through some Excel files. So step 3 is actually to enrich, right? So as I said, you either have a user interface which actually picks up these raw data sources, converts them into an API. And actually, I will show you an example of this at the end. How do you write that API to populate? When you write to write the API, you have multiple options. I'm giving you all Python options because our organization uses a lot of Python code. So we can either use OWLReady2 or Sparkle Wrapper. These are the libraries that are used by a Python program typically to interact with ontologies and graphs. You finally create what is called the knowledge graph. And once you create the knowledge graph, you can then create routines to validate your knowledge graph. Okay. Now, the reason this is required, this is so important, is because you have built an automated routine to read through the data and then populate the knowledge graph. What if your routine was erroneous? What, for example, instead of putting, say in our Bharti's case, instead of putting Kurukshetra as a district, it wrongly put Kurukshetra as a state, right? These errors can happen because ultimately these are programs that are doing it. So that's why there's a manual intervention required to validate the knowledge graph. And finally, once you have done the whole thing, you have to integrate the knowledge graph for your business case. So maybe you are building a context and a question answer system, or you're building a context aware analytics application, right? Or possibly you are just making a linked data application, exactly, the one that we discussed for the FDP program. I just want to link all my resources participating in the program like FDP, so that at any point in time, I get a comprehensive picture of my program. This particular program, how many users attended, which of the sessions were most liked by people, what were the feedback that came from this particular organization, all that, right? I can actually build a very, very rich linked data application for a program like FDP, right? So depending upon whatever was your business use case, you will build your application in such a manner. So let's move on to the next question. And this is a very interesting question. Assume that you are building a linked data application for the Atal FDP program execution and link all the related resources. What all would you use? What all of these open source ontologies would you use? Sorry for that. Yeah. If you can all go ahead and answer.
Is it FOAF and SCOS?
Sorry, what was the question? Yeah, SCOS is an ontology. We just talked about it. FOAF is a friend of a friend ontology. So friend of a friend ontology, I didn't actually take you through it. It's a very interesting ontology again, where it is totally based on person interactions. For example, if you wanted to build a social networking application, right? You want to say that there are people, they are friends of, so person one knows person two, person one is related to person two. So it's all about a social networking organization involving humans. If you wanted to build something like that, then typically you would go ahead with a friend of a friend ontology. So it has a lot of properties and classes that enable you to reuse such functionality. Okay. I'll give another minute or two for you all to decide which ones before I commented. Right, we are kind of stagnating on this distribution. So let me now comment. SCOS, yes, you've got that right. Organization, very much, because people who are attending the program represent organizations, and that is important. Now, between schema and FOF, I won't use both of them. Why wouldn't I use both of them? Schema.org is a generic ontology. If you guys have had a chance to look at it, I would urge you to explore it post this workshop. It is an ontology, or it's a vocabulary that defines people, places, things. So it already has a schema.org person. Okay, it has, in fact, it has a schema.org organization also. So I might actually, if I'm using schema.org and I'm using it for schema.org person, I might not go in for FOF at all, because they're overlapping ontologies. And largely, FOF, as I mentioned, is largely used to build a social networking application of sorts, where you are actually focusing more on the interactions between the people involved, right? And how they're related, and how they interact with each other. So if I'm using schema, I might not use FOF, right? So that's something that you all will have to think through. Now, I'm a little, because you've not understood the importance of provenance. Now, provenance is very, very important for an application like the one that I'm saying, the Atal FTP program, because here you are talking about different data sets, and each of these data sets are contributing to some way it is populating the data behind the application. I really would like to know, how the data has changed across versions. And from that angle, provenance is very, very important. I will once again go back to the Bharti application once we finish this particular poll to tell you exactly how provenance comes into picture. When you have to trace the movement of your data across versions, it's very important for you to include the provenance ontology. Right? For example, why is it so important here? You have FDP 1.0, FDP 2.0. How did the data from FDP 1.0 change in FDP 2.0? Right? So how did the way the program is dealing with all those various data entities, how is it changing across various versions? Then it is very important to include the provenance ontology to capture that information. But largely, I think you guys have got it right. So we will move on to the next one. The next important thing is the namespace or domain management. This is very important. We will spend a few minutes here. Now, what is a namespace? So when you look at something like SCOS, where this is the namespace for SCOS. So actually, this portion, the highlighted portion, is called the namespace of SCOS. And every property, every class is prefixed by that namespace. So when you say SCOS concept, this entire thing is actually this namespace. So even properties you will refer to as this one, right? So before you begin to build an ontology, you have to decide how you are going to manage the namespace. What does it mean? Am I going to have a different namespace for a T box and a different namespace for A box? These are the considerations that you have to make. Similarly, domain management. When you define a URL, see, semantic web is all about defining your nodes, your properties, your A box instances through that unique URL. That unique URL is defined by the HTTP address that you are giving. And so when you define an ontology, you need to grab that address. Either you use up, if you're building a vocabulary within your university's, domain, then you have to pick up some, path from that domain to store your ontology. right? And in this regard, I would urge you to read through this article. This is one of the best articles I can find, where it tells you how do you create and publish your ontology, right? So if you don't want to grab a fresh domain for yourself, you can actually create a vocabulary under the perl.org domain, for example, and this will help you to do that, right? So yeah.
Asha ma'am, could you kindly drop the link into the chat box?
Yeah, sure. Is it possible, you are anyways going to
Actually, we'll be sharing the videos.
yeah, oh, okay, fine.
So you could even copy this slide, means these links.
Okay, what I can do maybe is send you the entire PPT for you to share with.
Yeah, that is also possible.
Yeah, fine. Okay. Now, once again, let's understand this through a use case. Okay. Now, in our case, the application URL is this, which you all just accessed, right? And we defined the following namespace. So for Bharti ontology, that is our T box, our namespace is this. For resources, our namespace is this. A particular entity within Bharti, as you can see, it is until here. This is the resource, the A box ontology. Org indicates that this particular URL is referring to an organization, right? And if you see this one, this is actually referring to the organization class of the Bharti ontology. This particular URL is referring to the a specific property within the ontology. So let me just take a break here, and I'll show it to you in action. Let's go back to that Kurukshetra example. If I hover around on Kurukshetra, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. I've just put my cursor on Kurukshetra. Can you see? This is the URL that defines Kurukshetra, which is res.org16015. When I click here, what you see here is the functional page of this particular resource. But if you clicked on view semantics, it actually takes you to that unique ID within the Bharti vocabulary that defines Kurukshetra.
Please tell me one thing here. Why the Kurukshetra has the namespace Semantic Web India? Didn't you find it in other vocabs?
No, okay. So I am defining a vocabulary to define Kurukshetra, right? And in a manner,
Yes.
that be used. So I am the editor of the ontology called Bharti. I am the editor of vocabulary of Bharti, and that's the reason I built it. So if you want to, there would be entities called Kurukshetra, but not in a semantic web form. The only closest that you can find is in DBpedia.
You mean to say if it would have been state, or if it would have been Haryana, the term Haryana, then you would have imported it from some other vocabulary. But for Kurukshetra, you wish to define it.
Not like that. As on date today, if you look at it for India, I don't think we have any vocabulary that defines Haryana and Kurukshetra in an RDF form. I think Bharti is the first one that has done it.
Okay, this may be the reason.
Yes.
The reason, the problem is this, that if you find those terms somewhere in some other vocabs, you will pick them only, and
Correct.
otherwise you will define them, no?
Exactly. For example, let me show you one more thing. Can you see this? It says has spatial Kurukshetra, right? Now, can you see when I'm hovering on it, it defines geonames. That Kurukshetra is defined in a geonames vocabulary.
Yes.
Correct. But the definition of Kurukshetra in the geonames vocabulary is very different. Let me show you. I'm actually taking you to the geonames vocabulary. The geonames vocabulary actually tells you the population and the lat long. The purpose of the geonames vocabulary is to put a latitude, longitude, and a geospatial kind of a definition to every location on Earth. That's the purpose of GeoNames.
Okay, so you're utilizing that facility at least from GeoNames, and rest the definitions you are putting yourself.
Exactly. So now what is the advantage of doing this? When I want to access the geospatial details of Kurukshetra, I will not define them in my ontology. I would prefer to borrow it from something like GeoNames, which already has that information. Correct? Which already has that information. But I am building Bharati to define the way it is known in the Indian context. Right? So
Yeah.
for example, I would like to understand how have I defined Kurukshetra within Bharati. You can see that its parent organization is Haryana, its entity is this, the census code is 2001, and so on and so forth. There are so many things that I'm defining for Kurukshetra in a manner in which I can use it in the Indian context. GeoNames does not need any of this. GeoNames purpose is totally different, and that purpose is to define the geospatial properties.
So good one means if we also create some ontologies, maybe for domain specific applications also, and we need to refer to Kurukshetra and other entities which are already defined in Bharati, we should use that namespace.
Precisely. That is the reason, the more people use, like you and others, then it actually becomes like a hub and spoke model, right? Bharati tends to get, for example, people tend to find value in wanting to use Bharati.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So for example, if you create a very domain specific application, example FDP, I'm sure faculty development program is being coordinated by many such universities, right? NIT Kurukshetra is one of them. If you create a brilliant application which actually creates a semantic web enabled framework to handle programs such as this, some other organization, some other institute might gladly want to reuse your ontology.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, now here is the power of semantic web. So FDP is being conducted by NIT Kurukshetra will now suddenly start speaking to FDPs being conducted by IIIT Indore. I'm just taking some example. And now all of this data can now commonly be used by maybe probably the Ministry of Education, say for example. Right, and that's the power of creating such vocabularies, because it makes the data interoperable and reusable.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay, now let's go back. So I hope that particular thing was clear. Let's right, so that was now the next one was, now this is the last segment of my talk. How much time is left? Perfect, I'm on time now. So this is the hands-on segment of how do I actually build an end-to-end semantic web application using DBpedia. So I'm going to actually take you through the complete process, and at the end of this workshop I will urge many of you to at least try this. It's like building your first Hello World application in any other programming tool, right? Now, what is my knowledge management requirement? Remember, I will start building only when the requirement is clear. So my requirement is that I need a simple user interface that interacts with the DBpedia knowledge graph. I'm hoping that you all have had at some point in time interacted with the DBpedia knowledge graph. If not, we will do that now in today's hands-on. So given a text input, I want to retrieve all DBpedia resources of type category whose label contains that text input. This is my requirement. This is all I'm trying to do. And once I retrieve that, I want to present the results from DBpedia in a tabular form. That is my second requirement. So what all components will go into building this? There is a front-end component, of course, because the user has to type in that input, right? So some front-end component has to be built. There is a backend component which will actually accept that input, do the processing, get the data from the backend and show it to you. That's the backend component. And of course, to make this possible, how do you interact? How do you interact with a RDF store? So you need a library to interact, and we have used the Sparkle wrapper library to do that. You could actually use either OWLReady2 or RDF lib also to do, correct? Now, this is the user interface specification, right? I allow the user to type in something like I type in Ganges here. When I click submit, it has to show me all the concepts from DBpedia which contain the word Ganges in them. Can you see? So these are all the concepts within DBpedia that contain the word Ganges in them, right? And then I'm also printing the border of that particular category. That is the parent of this category and the children of this category. And then what are all those resources in DBpedia that use this category as its subject? So this is exactly my application. Now, before we go into this, I'm not very sure whether you guys have worked with DBpedia before. So let's quickly do that. Let's go to DBpedia. I don't know how to see. This is something.
Yeah, you want to open one more tab.
Oh, okay. No, I need to go back and open some tabs here. Okay.
Yes, you can, because your complete browser is being shared.
Okay, no problem.
Otherwise, you could stop sharing because your whole browser is being shared right now.
Oh, okay, fine, no problem. So let me show you here. So I'm going to go to dbpedia.org. Sparkle. So this is the way one.
No, hold on. Are you on another browser right now?
Oh, okay, no. By mistake, I paused the sharing. So
okay,
let me do a resume. I think by mistake I paused it. Can you see?
Yeah,
now?
we can see the browser now.
Okay. So just a quick hands up on how many of you have worked with DBpedia before?
Not exactly. People have worked, I think, at least not in this workshop, but they do have an idea, or they could speak in chat also, that are they understanding this screen?
Because the entire hands-on is based on this. Okay, no problem. We can do this quickly. So if you wanted to get some hands-on experience on working with Sparkle and so on, this is the best one because it has loads of entities within it, and you can actually use it to try out many of your Sparkle.
Yeah, this Sparkle endpoint of DBpedia was demonstrated in one of the sessions.
Okay, good. So now this is exactly what I'm trying to do. Can you see that, at the backend, I'm actually trying to get all the concepts which have, which have this particular label in them. So when I execute this, now look at, so this is one example of such a category. This is actually DBpedia's page for India. Now, if you can see that it is a concept, it has got a border, and it has got a border of, and this one, it is the subject of basically what are all the resources that are referring to this as a subject. So this is exactly what we are trying to do in this particular hands-on. Let's move on, and then I'll tell you how to build this. Okay, so what goes behind the screen? What happens behind the screen is the following. When you type in a word like Ganges, it actually it calls the API to return a list of concepts that contain this particular input. And for each such input, I'm going to get all the corresponding properties here. And then I'm going to render the results in the Angular page. So this is exactly what is happening in the backend. To do that, the first thing that I will write is I have to write the API. Now, as I mentioned that I'm not telling you how to build this in Angular, because as I said, that would be an Angular workshop then. So just, there are multiple sites on public domain where you can pick up how to build your first Angular, HTML page and so on and so forth. So I'm assuming that you've already built this page where there is a text box and I type something and it can take that input. And I've also built this portion where I have to render. So for example, I'm creating the table headers and so on and so forth, right? So that HTML page is already ready. So where am I starting from? I have already entered a text, and that text has to be converted, has to be referred to by this API to return the list of all the concepts. How do I do that? So this data is what is, this is the data that has come from the front end. I actually write a Python module using SQL wrapper. So first thing, what will you do? You will actually pip install, Python install this Sparkle wrapper library. So when you install, you will be able to call functions of Sparkle wrapper. So the first thing that you do is you define what is your endpoint. So this is what is being done here. Then you define your query. Now this query is nothing but a string. As you can see, this is a string. And whatever the input value that has come from the user is being appended to that string, correct? And this is a very simple query. All it is doing is, it is saying, get me all the concepts whose label match with filter data anywhere in the string, right? So you use a filter regex option. I'm sure Raghava or somebody who's taken the Sparkle session would have told you how to use filters in Sparkle. And once you do that, yeah, go ahead. Did you say?
Yeah, they told.
Yeah. Now, when you run this, when you run this particular query, it returns the results in the form of JSON, and this JSON will contain, two keys: the results and the bindings. So the bindings actually tell you that in this particular case, the binding is the question mark S and the question mark label. And from the binding, I am going to append it into my local variable called concept list. So at the end of it, what will it have? It will have whatever is my concept ID, that, right? Whatever is my concept ID, all of that will go into my concept list. So this is exactly what is being done in this particular query. After I do that, the next is for each concept which is in this concept list, for each concept which is in that concept list, I am now getting all the other properties. Remember what was my problem? My problem was to build all of this information from that concept. So first what I did, I wrote an API to get the list of all the concepts that contain this label. The second one I'm writing to get all the corresponding properties. So this is what you are seeing here. So given that concept ID, it is getting all of the other properties like broader, off, and all that. And from the result, it is converting it into a JSON object. This JSON object has got broader, off, and all that. So when you execute this particular query, this is what you will end up creating. This is the final JSON structure which is sent to the Angular frontend, right? So once again, let me tell you this flow. You entered a string. That string is taken by the API to get all the concept IDs. That concept ID is then going into another Sparkle query to get all the corresponding details. And then it is building a JSON object, which it is sending back to the front end. This is what has happened in all this code, right? So this is the JSON which the Angular object has received. And finally, this will be used up by your Angular code to show it in this format, to show it in a tabular format. Now, there are certain pieces of code that glue the whole thing together. How's the front end and the back end glued? So the search concept is actually your Angular code, which actually it says that this is the filter data that it sends back to the backend, and this is the app routes that you will be defining in your Node.js component. And when it receives an API call called search concept, it actually defines the structure of the get search concept here, where you will see that it is calling the get concept ID and get concept info, which you just saw, right? This is your get concept info. This is the get concept info here. And this was the get concept ID. So this API is in turn going to call those two Python functions. So that's how the whole thing gets glued. This is a very simple program. I normally give such programs to my team members as a hello world. This is their version of hello world. If they build this, they get the complete idea of how to start from a front-end component to the back-end component and the persistent storage, which is the Virtuoso, the Sparkle. So when you do this whole thing, it actually builds build this entire application, right? I type something and then I get the data out in the form of a tabular structure. Now let's just about half an hour left now. So let's join the quiz. So what do you think is the most important ingredient of an end-to-end semantic web application? So before you join, you have to write your name. Before joining the quiz, you write your name and then you answer the question. I'll give you roughly 2-3 minutes for the audience to type in their answers so that we can know how many of you got it right. When you're kind of done, you may want to indicate in the chat. And Dr. Sarika, just let me know when I can move on to the next screen and see who's got it right.
Yeah, just a minute, right?
Yeah.
So is it automated pipeline to populate the EKG?
I won't tell you the answer now.
Yeah, you could
Okay.
please call it there.
Yeah, you can just you can type in you can select the answer on your phones and press the send. We will know the answer shortly.
The most important ingredient, anyone we need to select.
Only one.
Only one. Dear participants, please call it at Slido.
Just type.
Chat window will not be of use.
No, yeah, you have to enter it. You have to enter it in if you want to see who's got it right and all that. Then you have to type in slido.com, enter this. You will find a question. But before you enter the quiz, you need to write your name, right? Just type in your name and then answer this question. And once you have answered the question, just say yes or something on the chat so that Dr. Sarika can indicate to me that a substantial number of you have answered the quiz, and we can go ahead and see the answer.
I hope this is the third quiz in series, so we could move forward. People might have answered.
Yeah, fine. Okay. Okay, I'm pretty heartened to see that 40% of the audience actually got it right. So these were the people who got it right. Congratulations. Right. Okay. So now let's move on to the last few points from the presentation before we reach the Q&A. So there are multiple semantic web applications from in fact, these companies that you see on your screens right now are basically people who have dedicated the complete organization to building semantic web applications, right? Each one of them. I think I discussed this in detail in my last talk as well. So there's a lot of traction. And here is where I proudly add our own company's logo here, because we surely have a big goal. We want to be #1 semantic web applications company in India. And our motto is to connect data meaningfully to enable powerful insights, right? And I'm hoping that, you know, we achieve that #1 spot sometime very soon. You'll also find that, you know, you have multiple, you know, domains where this is largely used. I picked up life sciences because life sciences is one particular domain which is so knowledge rich. There is so much of content, and it is impossible to have, you know, just AI and ML algorithms trying to make sense of the data, because it is very, very important for us to place the semantic context. And there is quite an amount of information, you know, quite an amount of vocabularies that have been meticulously built by different forums in the life sciences domain. For example, we have a very, very exhaustive gene ontology. There is a Bio2RDF movement, which actually brings all the ontologies in the life sciences domain together under one comprehensive platform. CGC is the Cancer Genomics Cloud. OBO, the Open Medical and Biomedical Ontology, is the guidance people use to define various properties and classes and so on. UMLS, we discussed. In fact, there is a journal that is dedicated to biomedical semantics in the life sciences domain. It is also a very rich area for research. And once again, you know, this is the slide that I spoke about in my last talk as well. You know, each of these is a full-fledged research vertical, right? My own research happened to be in the area of generating a semantic knowledge graph from raw data. But then, you know, one can do ontology alignment and matching. You know, there is a huge thrust in building question answering systems, building semantic web resources. In fact, our paper on Bharati, which incidentally won the best paper award, actually showcased the semantic web resource angle in the conference. Similarly, you have the natural language generation using ontologies, very, very important, especially in the medical domain. You want to automate the generation of clinical reports, you know, and stuff like that. How do you do that? Or you want to be able to read through some data that a doctor typically writes. One needs to align your natural language algorithms with ontologies to be able to do it. You can reason rules and reasoners to be used with ontologies. This is a very active area of research. So as I said, you know, it's a very, very active area of research. So as a closing thought, if I may put it, you know, I would urge many of you to explore working on this, because I can tell you for sure that this is the future. You know, semantic intelligence is bringing about an evolution in the capabilities of artificial intelligence. It comes with rich research opportunities. There are limitless possibilities when semantic AI is concerned, and of course, there is an application in a variety of domains. So with that, before we moved on to the closing slide of Q&A, just a quick on the top feedback. If you found this talk useful, just quickly rate it, few seconds.
It's obviously 100%.
I'm deeply grateful to all of you, because, you know, as an active member from the industry, I want more and more people to adopt this. And one of our endeavors as an organization would be to train as many people as possible on this particular topic. You know, as I said, India needs to make a mark in building its own semantic web applications for its you know, specific use cases. Let's move on to the Q&A session. So rather than looking at the chat, you can actually type in your questions here on the Slido itself. And if somebody has typed in a question that that somebody else wants to give a thumbs up, then, you know, I can pick up those questions first to answer. We are at 1:25. We have got a good 20 minutes. So I hope to answer as many questions from the audience as possible in the next 20 minutes.
Guys, you could put your question over Slido. Please see your screen. There is type your question. So they will be visible on the presentation itself.
And if somebody feels that my question has already been asked, all you have to do is put a thumbs up against it. Question, you just add. So then I would know that, so many people want that question to get answered. Okay. How is COS broader different from RDFS subclass of? Now, RDFS subclass of is a hierarchy for your T box. For example, if you want to say training program is a class, right? FDP is a subclass of training program. Okay, so RDFS subclass of is a T box property that defines the hierarchy of classes. COS border, on the other hand, is something that actually creates a hierarchy between instances. If you looked at it, a district has a border called state. A village has got a border called subdistrict, and so on. So I hope you've got that. SCOS border is more tilted towards the hierarchy in instances. RDFS subclass of is more tilted towards the hierarchy of classes.
Yeah. Okay.
Is SHACL is replacing the OWL reasoning as OWL following OWA, but SHAs, no, I didn't get this question, Dr. Sanju. You can unmute yourself and possibly ask.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Actually, SHACL is another language for the reasoning. It is the W3C standard. So I am studying the papers and I got that it is used for RDF validation, but it can be applied later in RDBMS also during the reasoning. So is it means that it is I am confused actually. I did not get the exactly difference between both of them. That is OWL reasoning is replaced by slowly with the SHACL shapes construct language. By the shapes or not.
Okay, I haven't used SHACL yet.
Oh,
but
no.
Can you?
No,
yeah, I haven't used SHACL yet. So what I can do is I will park this question to myself, and I think I have your mail ID. We have interacted before.
Yeah, by LinkedIn, I have interacted with you.
Yeah. So let me do some homework on this so that I can come back to you with a good answer.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat box. What type of research can be taken semantic web resources under ontologies? This was one slide, in fact, in your presentation. That what are the ontology research points in semantic applications?
This one, right? So, okay. This is okay. If you go to any conference, any semantic web conference, you will find different tracks for that conference, right? So there'll be research papers, there will be application papers, there'll be a resources track. The resources track is used typically to submit a specific vocabulary or ontology you have built for a purpose, which you want to share with the semantic web community. So say, for example, you define a vocabulary for delivering, say, programs for the at the institution level, right? So delivering training programs for the institution level. So you've defined a very special ontology where you define a trainer, then participant, resources that are required, all of that. You have to actually build a context as to why should people adopt the ontology that you have built. So then exactly like a research paper where you come up with a research idea and then you compare it with gold standard, you do your evaluation and all that. In this particular case, you have to prepare a context of why is your ontology better than similar training, ontologies that other people have built. So this is a very, very active thing. In fact, almost every conference has got a resources track. So here you have an opportunity to submit vocabularies or T-boxes for a specific domain that you have built and you believe it is useful. Yeah. I hope I have answered your question.
We could see it as a wonderful presentation, and I remember all the concepts well explained. So I hope immediately there may not be some questions.
No problem. So I'm more than happy that I could explain to the best of my ability. And of course, it could be well taken by you all. I am available on this mail ID. So let me.
Asha ma'am, though it is not part of presentation, but if you could in brief speak, there is a question in chat. What is explainable AI?
Okay, fine. So let me stop my sharing. I think we can stop this. Yeah, explainable AI. When you build a deep learning algorithm, right? When you build a deep learning algorithm, which is actually say a neural network, you really so you build those you build those internal nodes and weights and all that stuff, right? So at one end you send the data, your neural network works on this and it sends out the output. We call them non-explainable because you really do not know what happened within that network, what happened in that CNN, right? And sometimes there could be data biases that result in a particular output. Why could those biases come in? Because that's the way the world is. For example, if there is a heavy mechanical industry job, and then not many women apply for such jobs, and you are creating an algorithm which actually says what are the class of people who typically should apply for this particular job, and you have built an algorithm that is taking the data from whatever is available. So obviously there'll be an inherent data bias in your output, right? And many times such biases are inexplainable because we really do not know what is happening in that neural network algorithm that you have written. In semantic web application, that's not the case. That's why you say that it is highly beneficial to use semantic web algorithm as an explainable AI, because when you are inferencing something, it will give you the complete path of that inference. It will tell you which of the graph nodes it traversed to reach to that particular end result that it has come up with. For example, if it says that there is this set of class of people who are best suited for a heavy duty mechanical engineering job, it will actually tell you why it reached that conclusion. What are all those graph edges? What are all those reasoning points that it used to reach that particular conclusion? And that's the difference between explainable AI and the other typical forms of neural network programs where we really do not know what happened internally as a black box before the results came out.
So if I thank you for the wonderful answer. Can I ask you further one add on to this question is, if if deep learning is not answering why, right? Then are these deep learning algorithms going to be replaced by these KG graphs, or what is then the relevance of those deep learning things?
Deep learning is a very powerful task. See, deep learning is somehow trying to figure out the inherent relationships within the data to arrive at something. you cannot let go of that capability. You cannot let go of that capability because it is practically impossible for a human brain to look at those inherent connections in the data. I would rather say you have to use a combination of deep learning and semantic web to make it explainable AI.
That's wonderful. That's what I wanted to actually whether they will coexist or one will predate the other.
No.
So they will coexist.
They have to see what. If you remember one of my slides where I said, where does semantic web fit into the data canvas? You remember that slide where I did not replace semantic web with anything. I put very carefully, if you look at it, a lot of thought went into placing that bubble of semantic web in that slide. It actually was a bubble that partially masks the AI space and partially masks the domain expert space.
I understand. I understand that set theory plays very nice role in this.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I would keep it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. It is wonderful. And one more very quick question. Which programming language for front end will you like to prefer? R. Amudha is asking, will it be Python, because they are using Python otherwise?
Did you say front end? Front end, you would rather use an Angular, or it depends upon.
Maybe depends upon the application that is true.
Depends upon the React is another thing which is catching up these days. And if you're trying to build an application for a mobile device, a lot of people say that I should have an application that runs across an iPhone, Samsung, all kind of phones. In such cases, Ionic can be used. But so these are all, what do you call, they're all different components. I can build my front end using any of these technologies, whatever is the requirement of the application. The back end, again, you can build semantic web applications in a pure Python based environment or a Java based environment. Our organization has taken a careful call to go ahead with Python. And similarly, the graph database, you can use Virtuoso, you can use Amazon's, there is a Sparkle database from Amazon as well, Neptune it's called, or you could use your Neo4j, so many other options. Yeah.
As you said,
there is nothing called preferred. Yeah, of course, we took a call to go with a certain stack. See, typically organizations have to do a complete analysis, a SWOT analysis of what we want to go ahead with. And this could be based on, where is the industry moving towards and all that stuff.
That is okay. There is nothing like preferred, but again, I'll say, as you just mentioned, that you have taken a careful consideration and moved forward with Python instead of Java. So a very small 2 points. Why not Java? Because I could see a lot of APIs available, maybe libraries better in Java than Python.
We felt that a lot of reasoning languages that are coming up, there is a whole lot of support that is coming from the Python end. For example, we are typically working with a huge amount of data. So there is a distributed processing component also that we use, so PySpark actually fit into that requirement very, very well. And so these were the reasons we went ahead with the Python backend.
Right. That is really great, Asha ma'am, interacting with you, and it was a wonderful session. I don't know how long we move forward, but yes, my aim is also the same as the aim of your company. So our interests match, let us see. And I like to invite you for the advanced workshop also from 21 to 25. So we'll discuss about that at some point of time very soon. Thank you very much for being here today. And I can understand that all the participants really relished the session for today.
Thank you so much. It's really heartening for me. Nothing more heartening for an instructor, right? To know that the session was well received. You guys have been a great audience. Thank you so much for being so patient. It's lunchtime actually, and still you showed a lot of enthusiasm. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
So guys, we'll gather back by 2:45 sharp for another wonderful session by Arindan Chatterjee. So get back at 2:45. We'll assemble a minute before that. Okay, bye-bye.